Have you ever smiled so well that nobody noticed you were drowning behind it? Have you ever sat in a room full of people who admire your strength, but not one of them asks if your soul is tired? That's a kind of quiet pain the world doesn't talk about. The kind where you hold it together in public while falling apart in private. You become the reliable one, the strong one, the one who always shows up, and yet inside you're crumbling piece by piece, hoping someone sees past the surface. But they don't, so you keep going. You keep giving. You keep saving everyone else because somewhere along the way you were convinced that's where your value lived. I got so good at hiding my hurt, people stopped asking if I was okay. You made exhaustion look like discipline. I made heartbreak sound like humility. I wore self-neglect like it was honor. And I called it loyalty. But deep down, it wasn't love that kept me pouring, it was fear. Fear that if I stopped giving, they'd stop caring. Fear that if I showed my need, I'd be called too much. Fear that if I protected myself, I'd lose the only thing I thought kept me safe being needed. So I bled quietly. I stretched myself thin. I turned my peace into a gift I handed out for free, and all it ever did was leave me empty. But let me tell you this, that version of me, the one who gave everything and held nothing back for himself, that version is gone. I buried him, not out of bitterness, but out of clarity. Because pain like that doesn't leave you unchanged. You don't come through betrayal, exhaustion, and silence without becoming someone new. I don't walk the same now. I don't speak with desperation. I've learned to breathe again, not because the world softened, but because I got sharper, stronger, quieter in all the right ways. And this story I'm about to tell, it doesn't start with strength. It starts with breaking. It begins at the bottom, where I had nothing left but a choice. Stay in the wreckage or rise from it. And I chose to rise, not with a roar, but with a quiet, determined step into the unknown. You see, people think rising looks like shouting from the mountaintop, but sometimes it's just standing up when your legs still shake. It's washing your face after another sleepless night and walking into the world like you're whole when you're still learning how to hold the pieces. That's what they don't see. Most people only see the smile. They don't see the storm that built it. They see the calm in your voice, but not the nights you spent talking yourself out of breaking. They don't see the mornings you woke up with swollen eyes and a heart too heavy to carry. And that's the thing about pain. It doesn't always show up loud. Sometimes it hides in silence. It disguises itself in responsibility, in kindness, in patience. And while the world called you strong, what they didn't know is that strength came from surviving things you never told anyone about. You've been through moments that would have crushed someone else, but you made it look easy. You showed up when you had nothing left to give. You kept saying, "I'm fine," because there wasn't space to do anything else. And over time, you stopped waiting for anyone to check on you. You stopped hoping for comfort, for presence, for someone to see the weight you were carrying, because every time you let your guard down, you were met with silence. Every time you spoke your truth, someone changed the subject, so you learned to hold it all. You carried pain like it was your duty and called it loyalty. You swallowed your needs and called it love. And somewhere in all that survival, you started shrinking just to stay connected. You made yourself small so others wouldn't feel insecure. You downplayed your intuition so they wouldn't call you dramatic. You let disrespect slide because calling it out meant confrontation and you were already exhausted. So you tolerated the bare minimum and tried to turn it into something sacred. You let people come and go as they pleased, even when their presence always left you worse off than before. You blame yourself for their distance. You questioned your worth because they didn't know how to value you. And the more you gave, the more invisible you became. That's the storm nobody saw. Not the arguments, not the heartbreak, but the slow erosion of your peace. The quiet collapse that happened every time you silenced your truth to keep the connection. And you told yourself that if you just loved them harder, stayed a little longer, proved yourself a little more, maybe they'd stay. Maybe they'd change. Maybe they'd see you. But they didn't. And that's when the storm shifted, not outside, but within. The moment you stopped asking, stopped begging, stopped explaining, that was the moment the wind changed. The rain slowed, and for the first time in a long time, you felt still. That stillness wasn't peaceful yet. It was just the absence of noise, but it was enough to make you pause, enough to make you listen, enough to start asking a different question, not what else can I do to keep them, but what am I losing by staying hurt? And that question, that was the beginning of your return. There's a moment somewhere between losing them and finding yourself when everything goes quiet. The noise that once filled your days, the messages, the tension, the waiting, the weight, it all fades. And at first, that silence feels like grief. It feels like something is missing. You think it's them? You think it's love. But the longer you sit with it, the more you realize it's not their absence that hurts. It's the parts of yourself you had to bury just to keep them close. It's the quiet ache of self-betrayal that finally has room to speak. I remember one morning, nothing dramatic, no breaking point, just stillness. I woke up, no alarm, no pressure, just me. I stood up, walked into the bathroom, looked in the mirror, and for the first time in a long time, I really looked. Not at how tired I looked on the outside, but at the heaviness in my eyes. I saw the weariness not from work or life, but from constantly trying to be enough for people who never saw me. I saw a man who had stretched himself thin, who had smiled through disappointment, who had silenced his truth just to keep the peace. And I remember thinking, not in anger, but in clarity, I don't even recognize myself anymore. It wasn't rage. It wasn't tears. It was a realization that I had spent so much time managing other people's comfort. I forgot what my own felt like, that I had become so used to being needed, I forgot I had needs too. That I had gotten used to the noise, the distractions, the drama, the emotional labor, and called it connection. But standing in that mirror, in that silence, I saw it for what it was: noise. Just noise. And finally it was gone. That silence, it didn't scare me anymore. It grounded me. It told the truth. It reminded me that peace doesn't beg. It doesn't chase. It doesn't explain itself. It just is. And for the first time, I didn't feel like I had to fill the space with apologies or phone calls or people who couldn't carry the weight of me. I didn't have to rush to prove I was okay. I didn't need to run back to what hurt just because it was familiar. Because when the silence finally speaks, it says things you can't unhear. It tells you that you've been offering sanctuary to people who only came to rest, not to respect. That you've been handing out access to people who came to take, not to build. And that every time you swallowed your truth just to avoid conflict, you were telling yourself your voice didn't matter. But it does. You do. That morning changed something in me. I didn't text. I didn't explain. I didn't open up old doors hoping someone would knock. I made my coffee, I sat in the stillness, and I breathed for me. Not for the version of me they liked. Not for the role I had played. But for the man who had finally learned that silence isn't a punishment, it's protection. It's a return. It's a soft, steady place where healing begins. That was the day I stopped fearing the silence. That was the day I started listening to it. And when you do that, when you let silence become your mirror, you stop looking for answers in other people. You start remembering who you are. And once you remember who you are, you can't keep handing yourself over like you've forgotten. There's a point in every healing journey where realization has to become movement, where knowing isn't enough. You've got to act. You've got to choose yourself in real time. And for me, it didn't happen in a single dramatic goodbye. It came in small, intentional decisions, quiet closures, unsent messages, fewer explanations. It came the moment I realized access to me was never supposed to be free. You see, I used to hand myself out like a lifeline, always available, always reachable, always picking up the phone for people who only called when they needed something. I was the emergency contact in life where I barely held a place on the calendar. And I told myself that was love, that being there no matter what meant I was loyal, grounded, kind. But there's a difference between love and enabling, a difference between compassion and self-neglect. And once I saw that, I couldn't unsee it. So I started changing the locks, not to punish anyone, not out of bitterness, but because my peace had been looted one too many times. I stopped giving people unlimited access to my time, my thoughts, my energy. I stopped showing up in places where my presence was overlooked and my boundaries disrespected. I stopped chasing conversations that always left me feeling smaller than when I entered. And the moment I did, something shifted, not out there, in me. Because cutting access, it's not revenge, it's reverence. It's honoring the part of you that used to stay too long, that used to say yes through gritted teeth, that used to confuse emotional labor with loyalty. And when you start honoring that part of yourself, you don't do it with announcements or arguments. You do it with action. You do it with distance. You do it like a ritual, slow, sacred, quiet. There were people I used to text every day that I now pray for in silence. People I used to explain myself to, who no longer get clarity from me. People I used to open my soul to, who now meet only the surface. And you know what? That's not cold. That's called discernment. That's called protecting what's been bruised too many times. When someone shows you they can't handle your peace, your presence, your depth, you don't owe them chaos just to stay connected. You don't have to bleed just to prove your love. You just stop handing out keys to people who only come to leave the door swinging behind them. So I started filtering every connection through one question. Do they honor the access they've been given? If the answer was no, I closed the door. Not with hate, with grace. Because protecting your peace isn't about creating walls. It's about creating gates. Gates you open with wisdom. Gates you guard with strength. Gates that remind the world what's sacred inside me doesn't belong to just anybody. There comes a time when you get tired, not tired in your body, but tired in your spirit. Tired of showing up like a performance. Tired of adjusting your tone, your truth, your tenderness just to keep the peace in rooms that never cared for your presence to begin with. I reached a point where I had to ask myself a hard question. Am I living or am I performing? And I didn't like the answer. Because the truth was, I had been acting like everything was fine for far too long. Smiling through silence, laughing through heartbreak, holding people up while no one even thought to ask if I was okay. I made peace look easy, but it was never peace. It was survival dressed up in good manners. And that's what shook me. How many times I betrayed myself just to make someone else feel comfortable. How often I allowed my own peace to be the price for keeping the connection. I said yes when my whole body was saying no. I gave explanations to people who didn't deserve my voice. I stayed when the room was already cold and empty, because I thought if I just gave it time, they'd come around, but they didn't. And that's when I realized I wasn't choosing love. I was choosing performance. I was shrinking myself just to fit roles other people needed me to play. The fixer, the forgiver, the one who never complains, the one who always shows up. But peace doesn't live in performance. It lives in truth. And truth is quiet. It doesn't beg to be heard. It doesn't twist itself to be understood. It just is. And the day I stopped trying to be everything for everyone was the day I started becoming everything for myself. That was the shift. I no longer needed to be seen a certain way. I needed to feel a certain way, still, honest, free. So I started choosing differently. Silence over arguments, distance over dysfunction, rest over rushing, and peace over performance. Not because I'm cold, not because I've given up on people, but because I finally come home to myself, because I've learned that what they call selfish, I now call sacred. They don't know what it costs to get here. They weren't there for the nights. I whispered prayers through tears or sat in silence trying to convince myself not to give up. They weren't there when I broke and bled quietly behind closed doors. So no, they don't get to define what peace looks like for me. From here on, I choose truth, even if it costs me approval. I choose stillness, even if it means walking alone. I choose peace. Not the version that keeps the peace for others, but the kind that keeps me whole. And that kind of peace, it doesn't perform, it doesn't seek applause, it just lives quietly, powerfully, unapologetically. And when you start living like that, something inside you shifts. You stop mourning the fire and start honoring what it forged. You no longer carry your story like a weight, you wear it like armor. You stop asking what it cost you and start asking what it taught you. The heartbreak, the silence, letting go, they weren't the end. They were reborn. There comes a moment in your journey when you stop negotiating with your past. You stop asking old versions of yourself for permission to rise. You stop waiting for someone to come back and make it right. You stop hoping for closure from people who never knew how to handle your open heart. Instead, you begin again, quietly, boldly, intentionally. You start writing a new list, not of what broke you, but of what rebuilt you. And this list, it's not about what you lost. It's about what you found when you finally laid your bleeding down and picked your peace up. I don't chase anymore. I don't beg for clarity. I don't explain my soul to people who weren't listening when I was whispering in pain. I don't shrink to make others feel tall. I don't sit at tables where I have to hide my hunger just to keep the conversation calm. I don't stay silent when something inside me is screaming. I don't hand out chances like I don't know what they cost. I don't keep giving to people who only show up when it's convenient. I don't overextend. I don't over-explain. I don't keep bleeding just to prove I still care. But I do choose peace. I do value solitude. I do protect me name, me energy, me spirit. I do walk away early when the room doesn't feel safe. I guard my joy like the breath in my lungs. I do say no like it's a prayer. I do love deeply but wisely. I do give generously but only to those who know how to hold what I offer. I do rest not as a reward but as a right. I do speak with intention. I do move with clarity. I do carry my silence like a shield, not to shut people out but to keep my spirit whole. And what I've learned is that resurrection doesn't always look like shouting from the rooftops. Sometimes it looks like not answering the phone. Sometimes it looks like deleting the message before you send it. Sometimes it looks like staying home, breathing, stretching, saying, I'm not going back there. Sometimes resurrection is quiet, gentle, steady, but it's still holy because I am not the person I used to be. I'm not the version who tolerated chaos and called it connection. I'm not the version who handed out access like peace wasn't expensive. I'm not the version who begged to be seen in places where my voice had to compete to be heard. I've risen from that. I've built something sacred in the space where I used to perform. And from now on, I only move for peace, for purpose, for presence. Everything else can stay behind. And of course, when you start choosing yourself that boldly, the world doesn't always understand. People will say you've changed. They'll whisper it like an accusation, like clarity is a crime. They'll say you're colder now, more distant, harder to reach. But what they don't realize is that you didn't go cold, you just stopped burning for the wrong people. You didn't lose your warmth. You stopped setting yourself on fire just to keep others warm. You didn't become selfish. You stopped sacrificing your soul in places that never fed you. And when they say, you're not like you used to be, that's not an insult. It's a sign that healing is doing its job. You see, people love the version of you that was always available, always agreeable, always apologizing for having boundaries. They love the one who stayed quiet when disrespected, who gave without being asked, who bent every time someone else couldn't meet them halfway. They loved that you carried the emotional weight of every room you entered, even when your own back was breaking. But now you've changed. Now you've gotten clear, not cruel, not distant, clear. And with clarity comes decisions. You no longer explain your no. You no longer entertain confusion from people who were never listening. You no longer make excuses for those who had every opportunity to treat you better and chose not to. Your presence is no longer a free-for-all. It's earned. Your time is no longer a sacrifice. It's sacred. And the people who truly see you, they don't guilt you for protecting your peace. They honor it. They match it. They don't call you hard. They call you healed. Let them say what they want. Let them call it attitude, ego being guarded. Let them label your boundaries, whatever makes them feel comfortable, because deep down you know the truth. You didn't become cold. You became wise. You didn't turn away from love. You turned away from pain dressed up as love. You didn't start holding back your heart. You started holding it sacred, and that's the difference. You still love, still hope, still feel deeply, but now you do it with discernment. You do it with your eyes open. You've learned to protect your peace without apology, to walk away early instead of staying too long, to speak softly but with full authority. And when people try to re-enter your life, when they notice the access they used to have is gone, they might say, "You've changed." Smile, nod, because yes, you have, and you're never going back. This is where the shift becomes visible. This is where the world starts to notice. You move differently, talk differently, breathe differently, not because you're faking anything, but because you finally remember who you are. This is the moment where everything you've been through stops looking like a burden and starts feeling like a foundation. The old you was built to survive. This new you, you were born to lead, to walk in rooms like you belong, to look life in the eye and say, "I've already been through fire. Don't come at me with smoke." You see, when your standards change, your circle changes. When you stop begging for crumbs, you start preparing a table, not for just anyone, but for the few who come with integrity, truth, and peace. You don't chase now. You don't explain yourself to people who never cared to understand you in the first place. You don't make room for half-hearted love. You've upgraded your boundaries, and that means only those who come correct can sit beside you. You used to be available to everybody, always showing up, always the first to respond, always the one keeping it together while everybody else fell apart. But now your energy is too expensive to hand out on clearance. Your time is too sacred to waste on shallow conversations and one-sided loyalty. If it costs your peace, your voice, your rest, it costs too much. Period. This is the version of you that doesn't apologize for wanting more. This is the version that doesn't wait for permission to protect your joy. You don't need approval anymore. You need alignment. You don't need popularity. You need purpose. You don't need a crowd. You need a circle, a real one. The kind that claps when you win, checks in when your quiet calls you out with love, and doesn't flinch when you set a boundary. You're not asking for loyalty anymore. You're requiring it. And those who can't match your energy, your honesty, your depth, let them fall away. Let them call you changed. Let them say you're too much. They were never meant to carry the weight of your truth anyway. You've outgrown shallow connections. You've evolved past survival mode. You're not living in reaction anymore. You're living by design. Every yes you give is intentional. Every door you close is spiritual warfare. Every standard you raise is a prayer for your future. And hear me, this is not arrogance, this is alignment. This is not bitterness, this is clarity. This is what it looks like when you realize you are not a background character in someone else's story. You are the writer now, and the pen is no longer shaking in your hand. It's steady, controlled, unafraid. You're no longer exhausted because you're overextended. You're full because you're finally fed. You don't live for validation. You live for vision. And the people who come with you from this point forward, they bring peace or they bring nothing at all. This is your turning point, the chapter where your power stops being potential and becomes presence, where your worth is not up for debate, where your life becomes sacred ground, and only those who walk gently are welcome. You don't return to what broke you. You don't explain why you left. You just build, you just rise. And this time you rise for real. At some point, the rise is no longer about proving them wrong. It's about protecting what's finally right. At some point, healing stops being about fixing what happened and starts being about honoring who you became in the aftermath. There was a time when you thought sanctuary was something outside of you, a place, a person, a feeling you chased. You thought peace was in their hands. You thought love had to be earned. You thought clarity would come when someone finally saw you the way you were aching to be seen. But now you know better. Now you've lived long enough, been silent long enough, lost enough to finally learn sanctuary isn't something you find, it's something you become. You are the sanctuary now. Not a shelter for chaos, not a home for confusion, but a temple for peace, a vessel for truth, a keeper of sacred ground. You've survived the fire and built a stillness no storm can shake. You've carried your soul through disappointment and disillusion, through silence and second guessing, and you've arrived here not as a victim, not as a fighter, but as a witness to your own rebirth. You move differently now, not because you're guarded, but because you're aware. You speak with fewer words, not because you have less to say, but because your peace is louder than your explanations ever were. You no longer beg to be chosen. You've chosen yourself. You no longer knock on locked doors. You build new spaces where your light is not only welcome, it's honored. You are not performing healing anymore. You are living it quietly, boldly, fully. And here's the thing, when you become the sanctuary, you stop rushing, you stop proving, you stop chasing. Your stillness does the talking now. Your boundaries do the filtering. Your presence does the work. And it draws in people who aren't looking for a game, they're looking for God in a conversation, truth in a glance, rest in a room. And you become that rest. You become the one who no longer breaks herself into pieces for connection. You become whole. And in that wholeness, you lead without effort, love without condition, and walk without fear. Let them talk. Let them wonder. Let them try to understand what happened to you. Tell them this: you stopped running from yourself. You turned inward. You cleaned the house. You sat in silence until your soul stopped shaking. And when you rose, you did it without noise. You did it without revenge. You did it with God. And now every step you take is sacred. Every no is holy. Every moment of peace is proof that you've been transformed. So breathe. You're not lost anymore. You're not waiting for someone to come save you. You're not looking for shelter. You are the shelter. You are the answer to the prayers your old self used to whisper. You are the living evidence that healing is possible, that wholeness is not a myth, and that peace, real peace, is worth protecting at all costs. And nothing will ever move you the way you used to move for those who didn't know your worth. This is the vow I speak over myself. Now, not as a plea for change, but as a declaration of arrival. I no longer chase what doesn't chase me. I no longer shrink to be accepted or bend to be understood. I no longer perform to be chosen. I rise now not because I was finally given permission, but because I've remembered who I am. Every scar has taught me. Every silence has refined me. Every moment I was overlooked has shaped me. And now I rise, not out of anger, but out of alignment. I choose peace. Not the kind that requires me to hide my truth or walk on eggshells to keep others comfortable, but the kind that lets my soul breathe fully. I choose the truth. Not when it's easy, but especially when it's not. Because truth is the only place I've ever really known freedom. And above all, I choose me. Not the version they preferred, The quieter, softer, more convenient version, but the full, unapologetic healed me. The one who knows her worth, speaks with clarity, walks with peace, and holds herself like sacred ground. So let it be known from this moment forward, I don't move out of fear. I don't explain my boundaries. I don't open doors that were never meant for me. I walk where I am called, I speak when it's true, and I love when it's safe. And from now on, I only bleed for my purpose, not for people.